Conquer the Noise is a podcast produced by Unconquered, an independent agency challenging brand perspective through redefined content. This podcast is dedicated to telling stories of outstanding ideas and people who have found their way amongst the chatter. Hi everyone, this is Jonathan Hansen, your host of Conquer the Noise. I'm pretty excited to share this week's conversation with CLUBZERO founder Safia Qureshi. Safia is a trained architect and has used her design skills to pioneer an award-winning returnable package system for food and beverage brands globally. CLUBZERO partners with businesses to make food and beverage on the go more sustainable, working together towards the ultimate goal of zero waste. They serve customers across the EU and North America, including some of the world's largest brands. We will talk about how their proprietary technology works, how they have achieved a market-leading return rate of 95%, and their next robust sustainable consumption model that will include reusable packaging in the home and body categories. Safia, thank you so much for joining us today. Safia, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you making the time.
You are so welcome, Jonathan. I am excited to answer some hot questions that you have.
So first one, the big pressing one, of course, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling from my home in London, where it's miraculously 22 degrees outside.
So for the U.S. Americans who have no idea what that means, is that like 80 degrees, 70 degrees Fahrenheit?
Yeah, Fahrenheit, whatever that is equated to. I don't talk Fahrenheit, so
okay. We'll be in temperature limbo. So you have a beautiful home. I noticed you just have fantastic light. It looks very zen. Did you design? I know your background's in architecture. Did you design your home?
I did. About a couple of years ago, we had a renovation opportunity, which we decided to expand and open up the house to the rear and just create more of like a nicely, light soaking space to the back overlooking the garden. And luckily, just in time, or well timed for COVID setting, where it was just really, really inherently suddenly important overnight to have a really nice space to work and live from. So really pleased that we did that. And yeah, a lot of the lights coming out from the skylights creates a lot of indoor-outdoor relationship, which I love. So my morning ritual is having a coffee and staring out of the window and looking at the trees and just listening to the bird song. So that's like something that just gives me a lot of joy every morning.
I think if I ever move out of Manhattan, which I shouldn't say if ever, I know I will at some point in my life, and I have the opportunity to buy or design a house, I would love to I love it when they can build trees into the home and it goes up. I love that style when you say blending the nature or the outdoor with the indoor. Also, when you can build in sort of creating like natural rock walls from the
external
ground. I love that kind of stuff. I think it's so cool.
And it's not very hard to do, by the way.
It doesn't look hard, but what do I know? I'm not the architect, so of course it doesn't look hard.
I mean, to be fair, it's a builder who does the real work. So I'll be one of those few architects who'll say that, I design, but I don't actually physically put it all together or make it happen. So half of really the work is finding a fantastic collaborator to help you execute on that vision.
So you background, obviously, you've been talking about is in architecture, but you have a new venture, a new. I don't want to call it a side hustle because I'm sure it's your life right now, and as any startup is, CLUBZERO. Can you tell me a little about what that is, what you're doing, and how you've connected the dots going from architecture to what you're doing now?
Yeah. So CLUBZERO, first of all, is a system where we help food and beverage brands find a path forward that doesn't involve single-use packaging. So at CLUBZERO, our mission is to remove single-use packaging. We're agnostic to what materials. We just believe that there shouldn't be briefs existing in the world where you're asked to develop something that's only used for 20 seconds. Unless it's incredibly small format and it can be developed through organic materials. I just don't see why and how we got to where we are, which is making things essentially that last for a mere number of seconds just for our convenience, when we can come up with alternatives which are even better. So what we have done is find a solution where we provide food and beverage outlets. These are brands, chains, small independents, mom and pops, give an experience to their customers, their food and their beverage to take away without the disposable, but in reusable packaging instead, that they can return when they're finished. So we've always seen these systems in play. If you think of, your milk bottles, or even today, actually, there's lots of these amazing startups that will deliver you fresh juices and different milks direct to home in glass bottles, which we'll collect. The beer bottling industry is the same, as well as some of the big kind of, drinks brands that have always operated glass bottles. I mean, these systems have always been there. The only main difference is that we looked at it from a to-go experience. So this is your food and beverage that you take away. And we connected technology to all of it. So it meant that we had the capabilities to really transform it from a UX perspective. So you could, as a brand, understand, where your inventory is, be able to manage it effectively, know how many times those items were used before putting them into end of life, just measuring your operations and having accountability for it, and then giving your customers an alternative to disposable. Right now, you have so many options when you go and buy your beverage. You'll have like soya milk, you'll have almond milk, you'll have oat milk. You'll have a lot of options for what goes inside packaging, but you have almost like zero options for the packaging itself. And so that to me was a brief. It was to say, how do we get rid of this idea of using something for 20 seconds and replace it with better products that are designed to last longer and actually have a better experience? Like, it's much nicer drinking out of something that's beautiful and that you can feel in your hand versus something that you can crumple and throw away, right? So how do we make that scalable? How do we make that transformative? So that's how CLUBZERO started. And I guess how you connect the dots between me, an architect, and then me as an entrepreneur is I see this very much as an infrastructure play. So for me, the brief is to the architect to say, design an infrastructure that is more sustainable, to remove the need for any kind of waste, and optimize for reuse. And how do you do that in the food and beverage space? Well, you develop up reusable packaging and you set up a convenient network of drop points, and then you run the whole thing with technology, and then you build partnerships and take it from there. So that's how those two things combine. They're very two different components. I mean, being an architect is very different to being an entrepreneur. They demand different things from you. They pull you in different directions. I mean, you started a company yourself. You're a creative, but then you're also a business person. You've got to run a business. You got to run a P&L. You got to keep your customers happy. In the space of an entrepreneurship, like this was an unknown space when I started in 2015. This was a crazy idea. Now it's almost like the solution that every city is putting forward in the form of legislation. So it's come a long way, and I had to spend a lot of time initially just trying to convince people that this was what the future needed to look like. So.
Yeah, I find it really hard to balance, just like as you said, between like the creative side of what my role is at the agency versus, like, as you said, running the business, steering the ship, making sure we're growing, making sure everyone's getting paid, making sure everyone has benefits, all the nitty gritty stuff. It's really hard for me to do both, and sometimes it feels really overwhelming. And you've mentioned briefs a couple times already, which is really fascinating because you're one of the few people that seems to really use an idea or the concept of a brief. And anyone who isn't maybe in the creative field or maybe who isn't in the design aspect may not necessarily know what a brief is. Do you mind just sharing what a brief is and how you're using that as part of your process? Do you have a brief for dinner for the week, or how far do you extend that?
I mean, we have a brief of life, right?
Yeah.
We have like a list of things that we want to see. And I guess you evolve that, or, it's a bit of a hubris scenario for me to sort of suggest that I have a brief for the city, which I do. I have a brief for the future. I have a brief for how buildings need to perform and look and feel. I have a brief for everything. I have a brief for what glassware I want to buy. I've got like an endless number of briefs. So you could look at it, the idea of brief is, it's in summary, it kind of outlines what your goal is, what you're working up towards, what is it that you need to get out of something. So the brief for a building is typically something really simple, like how many bedrooms. I mean, for a dwelling, it's like how many bedrooms, what is the floor space that you want, scale, what is the quality that you're looking for, what's your budget, and you sort of use a checklist of things that need to dictate the output. And so when I look at a city, and I was looking at just how we consume, our consumption isn't going away. Consumerism isn't going anywhere. I mean, you're in advertising, you sell to people all the time. That's, more is what we are generally given to as a messaging. So to go against that would be radical and, kind of, I would say, just immensely impossible. You can't stop consumerism. It is there. However, you can control it, or you can build things that manage it effectively. And that's really what we're saying. We're not saying eat less, drink less, or don't eat out, or don't drink out. That's not the brief. The brief was, how do you spin something that was designed for 20 seconds into something that has a better impact on society and is better designed? And so you put other ingredients into your checklist, because you don't want to just swap something out and hope it's gonna, you want something that's going to be exponentially better, because we all buy into the new. We want to buy into the new. We want to be part of the new. We want to feel like we're the new.
The cool factor.
Certain demographic of society does. Maybe other people, you get to a certain point, you're just, I don't really care to be new. I just want to be whatever I am. So the new is something that you can sell. And so we sell the new. We don't sell more. That's the main difference. We're saying we will displace single-use packaging with our products. We're saying to consumers, would you like a reusable with that? As opposed to bring your own reusable if you want to do the right thing. Like that's not something that's transformational. So when we work with brands, what we say to them, you're selling something new, you're selling a new experience. And when we talk to our impact investors, we're saying this is how much CO2, energy, waste, paper, plastic we've saved in a month. This is how much single-use packaging we have displaced in a month. Those are our metrics on that side. So the brief is like, how do we build a better city? How do we build better lives? How do we leave this world not feeling shitty? Ultimately. So that's my life brief is to do something of value to people who don't know me, who will never know me, but what I leave behind impacts them in a positive way.
Well, I think what I love about this concept is it goes straight to the source of brands. I think from what I've seen, a lot of marketing, and especially around brands that do a lot of polluting or have processes that aren't necessarily the most eco-friendly or sustainable, whether that's in the supply chain or it's how it's relying on cheap human labor or whatever. It's always like kind of deflected to the consumer a little bit, to like, oh, you need to do this, or you should cut this consumption, or you need to recycle our product. But they don't really talk about the fact that they're producing 1 billion plastic bottles a year, or there's no like end plan for those. They're not closing the loop on that. So what I love about this is it sort of deflects back to the brands in some sort of ways to create some sort of change at the start instead of sort of at the end of it, if that makes sense in that way.
Yeah. And, consumers consume. They're not, consumers are, the role of a consumer is to take what they are given. The role of an entrepreneur is to design what they are given. And so these are two ends. Now, you want to make sure that you are listening to the needs of the consumer. And when we did a lot of our research, initially when we first started, was we set up and we went to all the big coffee chains and we just sat down and we just chatted to people and said, what would, how would this look like or feel like to you? Would you be interested? This is a very qualitative research stage, right? You want to understand, like, what is it that motivates them? Would they be interested? And typically we are all consumers. So I have my own experience to dwell from, like you. We don't dictate what we see in a supermarket. We just have to grab what we see, and we will vote with our dollar to buy the thing that we want to see more of. And so how do I build something that people want to see more of? I need to understand what they want. So asking them to say, well, are you happy with the fact that you can take away bringing in your own, or do you have issues around that? Like, what do those issues look like? And they're really basic issues. They're just very practical issues. Like, well, why do I have to carry it? And so that was my first thing. So whenever I talk, I always talk, consumers don't want to carry a picnic set. We don't want to carry a bottle, a plate, a food box, a knife, a spork, whatever the hell it is. That's not what consumers want. They want convenience. And so how do you give that as an optionality when they buy? Because that's when they want to choose. It's really that simple. I know I've simplified it a lot, but going around this and delivering it to you in a simple sentence, that's basically the nutshell. There you go. That's an awful ton of research that I've just poured over.
Well, I think you have to boil it down as the simple terms, because it gets this. You need the good, clear story. Otherwise, you start interjecting too much and too much strategy and too much of the grains, I guess you will, of it.
The jargon.
I think people are going to get lost, and they're not going to know the why, where, what. So I think keeping it simple is actually really important, and one of the hardest things to do.
It is.
I've had a hard lesson in that myself over the last year, where we were in a pitch, and I got so into the thinking, so into the strategy, I overcomplicated the discussion and overcomplicated the creative, and we didn't win it. And I think it's just one of those hard lessons where you realize that simple, it really is better to keep it short, keep it sweet. You don't need to put a lot of the other stuff in.
And with clients as well, so one thing entrepreneurship teaches you is patience. Clients have a specific pace with which they evaluate and go through the same journey. You might have the same trajectory, but they might be in a different spot from where you are. And so turning around, you're like, oh shit, I just lost this person. They're like, way behind me, and I've completely, lost them. So how do I get them back into the room? How do I get them back engaged? And that's always a reminder for me, is patience is so critical as well in relaying the story and explaining and taking someone on that path. Because this is transformational. It's huge. It's scale. The scale of this is, it's the equivalent of any mobility solution that came in. I don't want to take specific names, but you can imagine which ones I'm talking about after 2010, where that switch happened for a consumer. It was really hard to get from one place to another place without spending a lot of money. And then suddenly it was incredibly convenient and accessible. And that's a scale we're talking about. We are saying it's going to be really convenient for you to opt in and just use things and return them versus throw them in the dump.
So can you walk through the process of what it's like? So all the way, I would love to start in the beginning of cup comes off the line, production line. Then what happens?
Yeah.
And you, again, so you can simplify it and keep it to the major milestones if it's easier or would take too long. But I would love to just get an idea of what the process is like.
So our brief involved the genesis of reusable packaging to have a unique identifier of each one. So like humans, we all have a genome. The idea is to have every item that exists has its own genome, basically. So in very short, informal ways, it has a code, it gets generated, it exists in the world and is recorded by our platform. So
on that, is that embedded in the device? Is it like a barcode that's scanned? How does that work?
QR code,
okay,
which has its unique identifier just for that item. Okay. There is no duplication. So we provide a platform that enables brands to either use our own reusable packaging lines, which we've optimized and improved over the years. And then we also power brands' own reusable packaging by providing them specific guidelines on what to put on it. So we don't want to own all the world's packaging. That would be an incredibly expensive balance sheet. So we deploy, obviously, a number of it in every city that we go to get it operationally up and running. And then we work with brands to create their own. Once that's generated, then these packaging items are distributed and set up in any given city. We work on a city-by-city base. So we very, very much scientific about which types of cities we even evaluate or look at. They're completely driven by three key things. One is, of course, the opportunity. So is there a big to-go experience in that city? Or actually do people just only eat at home or only in restaurants and they're not on the go? So opportunity and size. The second is we look at, once this stock is on the ground, we look at, consumer awareness. Do people care? Would they love this? Will legislation be behind it? And once that's all established, then we start operations. So the packaging will arrive into a food or beverage outlet. It will be set up, ready for service. Customer walks in and says, well, I'd like, I don't know, I'll have a salad to go and I'll have also a smoothie. And they'll get the option of, would you like a reusable with that? And that's the opt-in. And if it's a yes, they show their CLUBZERO ID and they get that through pre-registering and downloading our app. And if it's a no, they get it in disposables. And in some cities where we're operating, that means that they're charged an additional fee. So they will get anywhere between 5 cents to 25 cents charge per item. So that becomes an incredible catalyst for decision making, because we've seen it evolve before in cities where there have been plastic bag charges. And it's amazing. Well, I'm not sure how much it's impacted the US. I'd love to hear about it. But here in the UK, 5 pence was enough to force people to put fruit and veg in their own pockets. It's that it's that high.
What's five? So what's five? What does 5 pence translate to?
5 pence is like 7 cents, 8 cents. It's tiny, very nominal.
In Manhattan, when I go to the grocery store, whether I use a plastic bag or a paper bag, it's a 10 to 20 cent charge per bag per.
Right,
whatever.
there you go.
It's depending on the grocery store too.
Yeah.
I'm terrible and I always forget my bags. So I'm constantly paying the 20 cents or 10 cents because I'm just terrible. I always forget them.
Right.
I probably remember about half the time.
Yeah, it's harder. The behaviors are different. If it's harder to remember to bring things in, right? This goes back to my point of convenience. So I'm not surprised, but yeah, it's different if you have a car, you'll leave them in your bag and then. Exactly. But if you're in a metro city, you sometimes don't plan what to buy and they'll be more spontaneous sort of, I'm going to grab milk, whatever. So the behaviors are different depending on the context of the city, I find. So Yeah, so back to your point, in that journey, the packaging, once it's arrived, it goes to the customer takes it away, and the customer then is able to return it to the nearest drop point. And we have multiple drop points across the city. Kind of think of it as like your mailing box, or typically we're looking to have at least a drop point every 5 minutes in any general direction. It'll take obviously some developing to get to that stage, but that's what we're working towards. And once that's done, the customer journey is finished. That's it. We're not asking customers to do anything other than just drop it. They don't scan. They don't send us any notification.
Yeah, easy enough.
Yeah, easy. Convenience. So our whole thing is about optimizing for convenience.
Are those drop points the 5 minutes walk or distance? Is that from a pickup location, or is that from the other box?
Any. So you can buy from one location and drop off at any location.
Gotcha. Okay.
Nearest to you. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
And yeah, and you can take it home. So we work with we have a partnership up with one of the biggest food delivery companies here. Actually, they're the biggest in the world. So I think they own Grubhub in the US. They own Skip the Dishes in Canada. And so
that's a great name, Skip the Dishes. I hadn't heard of that. That's great.
Yeah, very Canadian. And then so you can order even online and opt into CLUBZERO's reusable packaging and get your food delivery to home in our packaging. And
we got a visitor. Is that your pup?
That's my pup trying to make a show in there. He's a Weimaraner, so he's only like 5 months old. He's barely 5 months old, so he's very excited about this podcast. So where was I? Got totally lost. In the delivery space, you have an opportunity to organize pickup from home as well. So again, convenience for us is so important. To make it super easy for a customer, we will offer them the opportunity to return it in our return bags. We'll come and collect it from their home for a fee, but it just adds to that layer of convenience.
Well, I can see that working, especially at least so I live in a high rise in New York, and there's 300 units in my building. If we had one drop off spot in the building, I can see how a delivery working with local restaurants would actually be pretty. Seems like it'd be easy, and really help with that, making it even more convenient for customers. You rolled out basically a trial program in the Bay Area. That was specifically with cups. It sounds like you're offering more than just cups now.
Correct. So CLUBZERO has a remit across food and beverage. I think the two are intertwined, right? So we started our journey in beverages to go. We became experts at that. We've completed over 500,000 orders. We've removed over 1 million items of single-use packaging from entering landfill.
That's amazing.
We worked really hard on that, and then we felt, okay, well, the journey isn't just beverages; it's also to complete the whole experience of takeaway. And we want to make sure that we have built a brand by the end of this that people will resonate when it comes to that whole experience around food and beverage. So we cover both. We've got a new line that we're launching next month for food, which is really exciting, with Just Eat, the food delivery company, and some anchor brands as part of that as well. So this is, for us, it's an opportunity to, I guess, engage with customers, understand, what are the other types of packaging that we could look at for them? How can we complete this experience? It's a really strange market. I mean, I'm an outsider, so I'm an architect that's come into looking at, through infrastructure, I've come into looking at packaging, at technology, at plastic, and an awful lot about plastics. And CPGs, and how this whole world works, recycling, that entire infrastructure to counterbalance and come up with a proposition. So it's quite complex, and it's immensely unregulated. That's the one thing that always I find kind of interesting, I guess, but mind-boggling coming from a very heavily regulated industry. I mean,
especially because plastic affects health so much, whether you're putting a hot food item in it and the chemicals or the water soluble chemicals inside of it that get into the food. And there's a serious public health component of this. Just an aside, which boggles my mind that it's not as regulated or as closely watched or tested. It baffles me sometimes, especially when you're reading I was just reading this recently how, at least in the United States, sperm counts in men are significantly dropping, and they're attributing that through plastic and the use of having certain chemicals within plastic. And it's just now catching on.
It's now catching on, and I would say that the way that a lot of the disposable packaging is designed, again, the brief and what it's meant to do is that short space of time you can only pack in so much performance. Mm-hmm. Something has such a low unit cost. Beverage container. I mean, you're working really on tight margins. And so their argument will be, well, how do we produce all of this? And it's just, my argument is, it's just the wrong brief. You've got to run. The brief is wrong. You got to start again. With reusable packaging, you don't have those issues because the plastic is durable, it's thicker, it's better quality. It doesn't degrade in the way that single use does because the lining is, in micro millimeters thick. Mm-hmm. And so there's also this sort of, I guess, naivety of the industry, but a lot of it has just been, I guess, shied away and removed from the public eye. But we're on a path where that isn't going to reverse, right? Mm-hmm. We're as consumers, we have more information, like you're saying, in the long-term effects. And we're seeing legislation now start to come out in support and in favor of banning and removing those actively, in favor of reusable packaging. So many countries are coming out with mandates, bylaws to enforce and remove single-use packaging. But yes, it's existed for a long time with very, very little guidance other than very high-level FDA and BPA. I mean, these are low bars. But yeah, I think we'll get there. It's just, it is quite surprising that we are in this mess with very little to count for in terms of responsibility.
Mm-hmm. So when you rolled out the program in the Bay Area, I'm curious what kind of insights you learned as far as the people in that area, or maybe as people who visit those types of restaurants. I'd love for you to share some of that.
Yeah,
if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I mean, Palo Alto was a really fun exploration for us because we had never expanded in the US until that time. And when I say expanded as in on-the-ground operations, we had done a number of closed pilots at Google campus, but those were just very short-term. This was a big opportunity for us. We were working with IDEO, who are fantastic.
They're great. Yeah.
Design consultancy group, great team, and we had funding and backing from NextGen partners, so Starbucks, McDonald's, Coke, Wendy's, Yum Brands, and Nestle. And they gave us the money to go and launch. So we did a retail launch. We got brands on the ground. We were in Bloomberg. It was, with typical entrepreneurship, you were like 18-hour days, going to bed at midnight, waking up at 6, coordinating between my team in Europe and then the team down on the ground in Palo Alto. It was intense. I mean, we had like a 4-month sprint to get it up and running. And the moment we launched, it was the first time I want to say that we launched in retail. So until this point, we had never really experimented beyond providing a service in bulk orders to like offices and those kind of clientele. And that's very different. The first thing that struck me was it's amazing. Like, build it and they will come is true. And having something physical running was a sensational roller coaster, because within 2 weeks I had different brands flying in from Canada. I had someone flying in almost from Seattle and from Miami. When I say almost, COVID was also erupting around then, so those flights didn't happen. I had a waiting list of 10 brands that said, "This is amazing. Can we get this in?" So it was a bit like, oh my goodness, this is really taking off, until we realized it was going nowhere, because we had this awful situation with World Health Organization announcing this was an official global pandemic. I don't know if you remember, there was a period of time where we were like, maybe it's going to go away. Maybe it's not going to be that bad.
I know.
We've had virus, deadly viruses before, but they've just never quite made it global. So I think we were under the assumption that this would, sort of subside and we'd be able to resume. But 2 weeks later, we had to just pause, and everyone had to just walk away and retreat. And that was a really strange experience. One of my senior advisors called in from Milan, and I don't know if you remember, this was mid-March at this point, and Italy had a huge explosion of COVID cases at that point, and it was just a national disaster at that stage. And he, from firsthand, what he was observing, he was like, "Safia, this is coming. You're going to have to stop." And that's a really hard thing to hear from your team, from senior advisors, from anyone from your team. I mean, you typically listen to your investors and your senior advisors. Your immediate team is just like, should we? Like, no. Until Leo was just, he said, "No, you need to stop everything. You need to come back to London, get to your family. That's the best thing you can do right now." And and that was it. Within 24 hours, we wrapped everything up, and I was on a flight heading back to London. So that was that. And literally everything froze. Those conversations, those flights, it was just a strange time warp. And then your head is trying to catch up with what's going on. So
absolutely.
I mean, we've all went through it, but it was a really bizarre time.
Did you use any of that time to start fleshing out your brand strategy or flesh out other product ideas?
Huge.
You may not be physically getting stuff in stores, but there's still a lot of work to do behind closed doors. So how'd you shift? What'd you do?
Yeah. So this was really interesting. I just thought, I let everyone have a 2-week break. I just said immediately when I came back, I just said, "Guys, time out." Also, we had just completed a 4-month sprint. We were all sleeping 6 hours a day. We were exhausted. So this was a good hard stop to a really long, intense project. Pens down for 2 weeks. Let's figure out what the world is going to do around us, as opposed to try and react to every press release, every call, every news update. Let's just wait. And so that's what we did for 2 weeks. We just paused. And then I called in a workshop after that to bring the team together. I called some friends from Bain. I called some friends from Coke and my investors, and I sat down. And I love using IDEO's methodology on how might we, and I framed a how might we question, which was how might we, address the new needs of our customers. It's basically it. Like, what are their new needs? That's what we need to do. If everyone's at home, we need to get this service to people at home. How do we do that? Well, we work with delivery companies. Okay, which delivery companies? Well, let's just speak to all of them. Okay. And so we did. And we got some no's, and then we got a yes from the biggest one, and then we signed a deal. And then we're like, okay, well, guess what? People eat at home. They don't really drink as much. So maybe we now need to move into food, and we need to accelerate that development. And so we started to do that, and we started to build and analyze on what the typical containers would be, which ones would be our first ones, how would they work, et cetera, get the feedback in. And then the third point was, well, we've got to have a brand that really spells out what we are looking ahead to.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we give the message of zero waste? How do we give the message of having credibility around thinking about community, thinking about consumers, really caring for the world? How do we build that? And so CLUBZERO for us built those two and combined that into a new brand name. And it was super fun. I mean, looking back, we've had a really amazing year. I mean, it's completely about product. It's completely about a 2.0. We rebranded. I brought in the ex-strategist at AMD BBDO, Gerard, who I love, super smart guy. He's also officially a New Yorker living in London. And then I brought in the ex-design director at RGA, Matthias, who is super fantastic. He's actually now joined Apple, which I'm not surprised about. And we built the brand. We just went through the whole process as you do to redefine ourselves. And we came out the other side, and we've got completely new product lines for packaging. Our drop points look amazing. We've done some further collaborations, which we'll be announcing. And I'm super excited about it because I think I turned COVID into a brief. I sort of just said, look, what are the new needs of our customers? And it's sometimes refreshing to give your team a new brief, because I think you can get a little bored if you're just optimizing things that are already happening. And that's, you could argue some of the big tech companies are slightly at that sort of crossroads where they don't know who they are anymore. They don't have critical creative leadership anymore. And they're just optimizing a product line that's already there. As opposed to really thinking about, what could we do that could be totally inspiring and surprise and delight customers? So that's kind of energized us and has kept us going through this whole period.
Yeah. The comment you made about as far as like tech companies and innovation, and I think you're right. There's a really sort of this interesting spot where, some of them have such market domination. It's kind of squashes some of the younger companies that startups usually in the innovative space, the disruptors, and then they're getting complacent. So we're actually kind of seeing a lack of innovation in some ways. And I think that I agree with that statement completely. And loved how you spun out a new brief during COVID. And, I think we did too as well. We didn't take 2 weeks off. In hindsight, we probably should have. But we definitely spun our wheels for a couple of weeks. Like, what the hell are we going to do? How are we going to pivot? Because a lot of our, first thing that gets cut is marketing budgets, and a lot of the work that we do is in production, which requires lots of people on set. So we had to stop that, and we were just kind of like spinning. And I think ultimately we came to the focus of just building out our agency programming, like podcasts and other sorts of ways that we can support other brands, and support continuing getting the strategy and voice out for brands who are like yourself doing really innovative things, in trying to like keep pushing that forward in a way, and step back from the idea of like selling and making. We just clamped down on expenses, and focused on producing like original content that was going to be useful for people, and I think it really helped for us.
And highly appreciate that as well. I think just listening, I think what we've become a little bit more aware of globally is just living more present in the now, because that's kind of all we had to hold on to. And going from being incredibly global to becoming incredibly local. So really connecting with people who are in your immediate areas more so than ever before. I felt like I was always on a path, and I am still on a path to always go to, the outer edges of the world and let people know who I am. And quite often I'm just forgetting my immediate like country or city. I'm like, this is just too familiar for me. And this concept of having to be out and living or working somewhere out had to just be reevaluated completely. So I completely hear that. And I think the ones that, it's interesting, you always talk about marketing being the first thing to be cut, but I think actually having a voice speaking to a customer, speaking to a consumer in this moment when it was all happening is the most important moment.
Oh, I agree. I agree 100%. And that's always my thing is like, everyone's cutting down right now. This is an opportunity to reclaim some of that market where it's less noisy. Ad rates are actually cheaper because less people are putting money into the actual media. And I think there's a lot of advantages into increasing your messaging, marketing, customer outreach, whether that's on social media or a more traditional way. I agree 100%. I never quite understood just closing the budget up entirely.
People are looking exactly, and I think and again, you're a consumer, I'm a consumer. Of course, it could be really odd and awkward if you can't continue business as usual in that context. So a lot of what we're working on now is we've got a campaign for the launch that's happening next month, which is incredibly local. We don't have the people we're photographing are the people who are on the ground. And we're giving a pull quote from the person, and they're all using our product, by the way. So obviously there's some relevance in it, but they're all using our product, and we have a pull quote from them, their name, which company they belong to, and then which city cluster they belong to, because we have so many chapters that we're going to evolve and use the same methodology. So they are the local influencers. They're people like, if you go to your supermarket, that's a person. I mean, in our context, it'll be your favorite restaurant or cafe that's serving you. It'll be the barista or the owner who greets you. Whoever those people are the people who we have spent the last year interacting with. And so if you see that person on a billboard, you're going to be like, what? That's awesome. This is great. Of course I want to be a part of this. So we sought to be super sensitive to thinking about what is going on in someone's mind. And it's just really, really trying to answer that.
Yeah, I think, go ahead. We can pause 1 sec. Sure thing. We can pause 1 sec. No worries.
Thanks. Is this running okay for you? Is there anything that you want me to
I think you're doing great. I'm going to start transitioning into a little bit just about the stats, and then start kind of getting in wind down mode.
Super. There we go. We are now juiced up.
All right. So what I was basically tagging onto what you're saying with that, I always thought there should be a campaign around the unsung heroes of delivery workers for these food delivery companies. So like I was saying, I live in a high rise, so I have a decent view of Manhattan below, and rain or shine, it could be hailing, and you see delivery guys on bikes zipping by. It could be you see them in the snow, you see them during COVID, you see them every condition, and they're out there like delivering food. And I always thought they're like these unsung heroes that aren't necessarily brought into the light in this whole, especially when COVID did expose and sort of bring to light these people who are putting themselves at risk to serve others, right? And this is I think a side of the service industry or food industry that just doesn't get enough credit, because these guys men and women work so hard at doing that, and
at feeding people and making sure that we at a time when we needed it, we got all our food, we got all our medical care,
prescriptions, everything.
It does go to show the service economy. And so interestingly, we as part of the campaign that we're doing, this topic did come up because I'm really passionate about showing everybody who uses our product. So that would also include the delivery person, right? It's not just the person who's in a restaurant or cafe it's a person who's distributing it. It could be the person who's collecting it or washing it or whatever, whoever comes into contact with it. But it's interesting because it's a big political conversation right now with riders' rights. Do they have workers' rights? Do they have employment status? So this is quite a hot topic. There's a lot of demonstrations going on. We did want to try and get some riders that we could photograph, but it's incredibly sensitized as an area. So for now we're just trying to just avoid coming into any kind of conflict or exposing our very early brand into that conversation. But you're right. I 100% can see that in the space of like 10 years, we've seen a completely new evolution of food distribution that just didn't exist before. You know, these guys start up at about 6:30 in the evening. You see them starting to get parked up in front of restaurants. They're waiting and they're in groups and they're talking. And there's no like real infrastructure for them either. Like, where do they go to the toilet?
Exactly.
Where do they sleep or snooze or grab a cup of tea or a coffee? And you sort of wonder, how is that infrastructure? Where is that infrastructure? And who's making sure it's effective? So yeah, it's a really unspoken part of, I think, how cities are evolving due to technology, embracing new business models. So.
And speaking of technology, I think it's really interesting that you're able to track everything with the cups or the food containers, and you have a pretty impressive return rate across retail and within closed buildings. I was 95% across retail, 99% across closed buildings, and I was really shocked by that number. I didn't think people were going to be that good about returning stuff. I mean, it's just my own experience, and I am constantly complaining to my friends and family, why are you throwing that away? So that, I think, is really interesting in itself. So how are you making that happen? How's that happening?
Oh, it's $1 billion question. I mean, I can't tell you the ingredients because that we've worked so hard to perfect it. But well, congratulations. It's got to do a lot with, I know you're not expecting this, business model. How we spend affects our psychology and relationship to something. And so I'm going to draw parallels as opposed to give you the exact answer. So we're going to take you on a journey, on a story. So, for example, if you walk into your favorite bookshop and you find, the book that you wanted to get for the longest time, you pick it up, you're super excited, you're like, yep, this one, and you go to the counter and you say, I'd like to buy this book, pay a certain amount, and you walk out of it. Now, as far as you're concerned, that book is yours.
Transaction's done. Yeah.
Transaction's done. And so the business model has dictated how you feel about the book, right? You paid, you got a receipt, you left. In our context, you don't pay, you don't get a receipt, you don't own it. And so we don't transact. The way that we transact is only if you don't return it. That's it. And so you never feel like you own it. Gotcha. And so you feel like, okay, this isn't mine. And that's as simple as that. I'm really simplifying sentences for you today. It's hilarious. I just wish someone had just written this down and I could just, like, cool, okay, let's look at that. I just kind of... I know.
Months and months of research and thousands of dollars later, it's one digestible sentence. It's kind of great. I love it. But it makes sense from a psychological perspective. And I think what's interesting is I was wondering about deposits, which sort of would play into this conversation a bit. So there's no deposit factor.
No. So that's the business model difference. Yeah. So we don't put deposits on items for a number of reasons. Now, I might be forced to do it because regulation might want to push it in that direction. We don't know. We'll see. But I find a problem with deposits, a number of them. The first is there's no data. So if I don't know what you bought where, I wouldn't know how long you've had it for. So deposits are kind of like what are currently prevalent in the world for a lot of single-use items. So this
like
brings me to my second point. Yeah. So these are nominal values. So 20 cents, 50 cents, single-use, easy. For reusables, we put a lot more investment into producing these products. So for us, the deposit would have to be significantly higher than 20 cents. It would have to be like $3 to $5, $7, $8. That starts to incrementally sound like a lot in terms of a cash flow perspective. So that brings me to my third point, which is inclusivity. I want to make this convenient for customers. I don't want them to feel like, oh my God, I've got to have 50 pounds before I make this transaction of X, Y, and Z. And that sounds like a lot. And so I'm just going to go for the simpler option, which is, a nominal amount. They might not also have the cash flow. They might not want to spend. They might have it and they just don't want to. So instead of putting those barriers on, what we did through a lot of research and what we realized was actually just save the payment on file and charge someone if they don't return it. So it's reactive as opposed to proactive. And the business model is different. You are aware that you haven't purchased something. You are aware that you're borrowing something. So it isn't a bookshop, it's a library. You bought something in a bookshop, you borrowed something from a library. That's the fundamental difference.
I think it's a great way of explaining it, and makes a lot of sense, and it's really smart. So we're approaching time. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It went by really fast. So thank you. Before we part, I always like to ask people to give themselves, their younger versions of themselves, advice, or if they have a young child, do we want them to hear later on? What kind of advice would you give them? So I'm going to extend that question to you as well.
Would be, be bold to think up of new briefs around you. Like don't take the world for a finished project. It's a work in progress. Everything around us is work in progress. So, when you see something, question it. And if you feel this could be better, go for it. I mean, I honestly, I hope to see more architects become entrepreneurs because they generally have a capacity to do a lot more than just design buildings. I mean, they're incredibly skilled in so many different areas, but I feel that the industry really does lock them in and keep them in a specific box. And that's propagated by the institutions that create it. But, you don't have to be in an industry to design a new brief. Of course, you need to then evaluate and understand and bring all the learnings in to bring you up to speed. But question everything and reevaluate it is what I would always say. And that's basically just to, it is a journey, and it is about making what we have around us just better. Why wouldn't you is my question. Like why not? And so from a young age, I'd sort of set those as little exercises for kids to start off with from a very young point. I have a 2-year-old.
Are they practicing briefs already?
What could you do differently? I mean, it's, I think when we're kids, we're a lot less institutionalized into or conditioned into specific norms, right? So we observe a lot of experimentation when you look at children, because they're not exercised to death to know or think in a specific way, and to logically accept certain things for what they are. And so it's nice to see and sometimes hear, and you think, oh yeah, okay, that's an interesting way of looking at it, but it's purely just ignorance, which is an innocence, and that's something that's quite lovely to see. But that would be my leading sentence, is to question everything and not accept the status quo.
All right, Safia, that's great advice. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to see how your business grows and how this takes off. I can't wait to actually use one. I'm sure New York City's in your rollout program, so I'm excited to see one in person.
I would love for that to happen at some point. 2022 or 2023 onwards, we'll make that happen. But it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for listening to the story. It's lovely to share it with you guys.
All right. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks.
Thank you all for listening to our conversation with Safia. If you haven't already, please head over to the Apple Podcast app and leave a review. Reviews are the best way for us to grow our audience and help spread the word on how to create a more sustainable and purposeful lifestyle. See you all next week.